All right, so let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Student Alumni Association Moving to the City Series Washington, D.C. event. This event is hosted by the Student Alumni Association. My name is Dmitry Vlasov from the class of 2019. I am the Alumni Relations Coordinator for SAA and will be your moderator for tonight. So welcome. As you can see, this event is done online via a platform called Zoom that features a chat box below for you to post questions for our three panelists at the end of the event. Video chat will only be turned on for myself and the three panelists, while viewers will remain anonymous. So the event format, the format of tonight's event will be 45 minutes of questions created by members of the Student Alumni Association and 15 minutes of questions from you, the viewers. As mentioned, your questions can be posted in the chat box below. Please ask your questions throughout the event and we will make sure to answer them at the end. If you would like to follow up with our three panelists after the event, their emails will be provided in an email following this event. So meet our panelists. First up, I'll introduce Sarah Cove.
Hi. Am I like doing my full introduction right now?
Yep.
Okay. Hi. I'm Sarah Cove. I graduated in 2011. I was a nursing major, initially moved to Baltimore right out of school, and then have been in DC for 4 years now.
Awesome. And then Allie?
Hi, everyone. I'm Allie. I graduated in 2017 as a public health major with a focus in emergency management. And now I live in Alexandria, Virginia. I'm an emergency management specialist with DC Homeland Security, and I look forward to speaking with all of you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be here tonight. Our third panelist, Takoria Jackson, we're hoping to have her tune in soon. But other than that, we'll kick off the event with our first category, which is why you moved. So Sarah, I'll have you take it away. So what made you choose to live in the greater DC area?
So as a nurse, I said I tried to find a lot of jobs in Boston and they didn't want to hire any new grads, unfortunately. So I had a sorority connection actually from UMass, from CAIO, and that is how I got my job at Johns Hopkins. So it really is who you know, I guess, more than anything. So I moved to Baltimore at the beginning of 2012, was there for about 4 years, and then moved to DC because that's where my boyfriend, now husband, is. And so this is where we are.
Awesome. Well, I'm happy you found your home in DC. It's awesome. And Allie?
Okay, so I graduated in May 2017 and was offered an internship with DC Homeland Security starting at the end of that month. So I graduated and moved to DC about, I think, 2 weeks after I graduated. So that was kind of rough, but we made it work. And so I was an intern for a couple months and they offered me a contracting position. So I accepted and stayed. And I've been with them for 2 years. I've recently transitioned over to being a full-time government employee. So that's pretty cool. I've been living right outside of DC in like the Northern Virginia. So like Arlington, Alexandria area. But yeah, I ultimately came here for that internship and for grad school. Another important thing, I just graduated in December with my master's in emergency management from Georgetown. So that's pretty cool. Somehow it all ended up working out. But
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm
Congrats on the master's degree. That's amazing. What a great story. So Sarah, we'll move on to the next question. So what are the benefits of living in DC? Would you consider living outside the city?
Eventually, I'll probably move back to Boston, and I'll probably be outside that city. I currently love living inside. Allie can speak more to living like a little on the outskirts, but I do love that everything is so close. I'm a 10-minute drive to Children's National where I work, and I have a lot of coworkers and friends who live in my immediate building across the street, so it's really nice to have a lot of people around. I like the public transit, and I don't know, it's just nice having things right outside my door, like a grocery store across the street.
Yeah, awesome. And Allie?
So when I first got to DC, I lived on the GW campus for about 6 weeks because I wanted to make sure that I could kind of seek out like a good apartment or like a good location for myself. So I would agree with what Sarah said. Living in DC is super awesome because everything is so close. The metro is awesome. Everyone uses it. It's really easy to understand. I work in Southeast DC in Anacostia. So for me, living right outside in Alexandria, I'm about 10-15 minutes by car, Uber, train, whatever to get into the city. But it just commuting wise works so much better for me because I can just kind of like zoom. That wasn't a word. I'm so sorry. Like zip around the city to into Southeast DC. I just like, I don't know, just I deal a lot with special events with my job. So with all the street closures and stuff, it's just so much easier for me to not have to deal with that. But after living in the city for 6 weeks, it's awesome too. It's really all like who you are as a person and what you're willing to do. If you have a car, if you're okay with Uber, if you live near Metro, there's a lot of different factors. So.
Cool, yeah. So I think one of the most important things to consider when moving to any city, but especially DC, it's a fairly expensive city, you know, and you got to first consider finding an apartment, finding a place to live, which I'm noticing is a common theme between both of you. You know, it's really important to find an apartment. So Sarah, what should you look for in an apartment? What type of documents are needed, and what should you look out for on an apartment tour?
So I live in like a luxury high rise. They're all over the city. They are nice because they have a gym, they have like rooftop pools. It's like hotel living, honestly. In Baltimore, I lived in like a little bit of an older place, but it was still really cool, like an old factory that they repurposed. But new buildings are popping up everywhere. They're a little bit more expensive because everything's brand new. Things I would recommend to look for would be washer, dryer, and unit. It's very important. Dishwasher, etc. But trying to think of documents, I think when I looked in Baltimore, I initially needed a paycheck, like showing that I had some kind of an income to pay my bill. I believe they do a credit check. You'll need a deposit, typically for first and or last month. Yeah. And then as far as location, like why I chose where I live, I initially was commuting from DC to Baltimore, which was awful. Don't do it. And I wanted to be near a highway. So that's why I'm about 10 minutes from the highway that brings you to Baltimore, in a kind of up and coming neighborhood called Noma. It's near Union Station, which is a popular landmark, I suppose, kind of near the Capitol building. But yeah, I think the high-rise buildings are nice just because everything's fresh and new and clean, and I would recommend it personally.
Awesome. Yeah. And Allie, how'd you go about finding your first apartment?
Yeah, so I use Zillow a lot, use a lot of Google. I asked a lot of people that I worked with trying to figure out what areas would be best, just because you kind of want to make sure that you're checking out the different neighborhoods, because I've noticed that, I mean, with any city, really, block to block, safety can change a lot. So just kind of being familiar with the different areas. And I know DC, once you get familiar with the geographics of it, you can kind of figure out, so like Southeast DC, not the best area, you know. Navy Yard used to be really rough, but now it's really awesome. There's the stadium. So you just kind of have to ask around and figure out what area you're willing to live in. Prices do vary based off of that. Sarah had a lot of really good points. One or a couple things that I'll note. When I first moved into my first apartment here, I did need a co-signer because I had just been a full-time student the whole time. So be prepared for that. And then in Massachusetts, apartments are legally required to individually meter utilities. That is not the case in Virginia. I don't know about DC or Maryland, but my first apartment was not individually metered. And so that basically meant that, like, for water, for trash, for electricity, they would figure out what the whole building used, and then they would divide that by the number of residents, and then you would be charged that way. So we would always turn all our lights off, make sure we took short showers, turned off the ceiling fan, and the bill was still the same. And we found out it was because it wasn't individually metered. So at that point, it kind of sucked. But that's something to be aware of because I had no idea.
Yeah, I didn't even know that existed, and I think that's a really important thing for someone looking in the DC area. even near in Virginia. You know, it's very important to see that because that actually transitions us excellently into our next category, which is what type of housing budget should I expect? So Sarah, what other expenses are to consider on top of the housing budget? What would you recommend for someone moving to the DC area?
So I'll tell you like the bottom of the scale, as far as I'm personally aware, my current husband, only husband I've ever had, he when he lived alone, he had a studio apartment that had no amenities. It had no washer dryer, no dishwasher, no like group rooms or anything. And that one bedroom was 1,800, which is like not cheap, not super expensive, but that's kind of like the low end of what I know about. And then I have a friend who had a one bedroom across the street where I live, and that's about 2,600 with like fresh, brand new everything. So that, I mean, of course, if you have roommates, it's cheaper typically. I know a lot of people who pay around 1,300 if they're sharing an apartment, which I 100% recommend, especially if you're moving to a new city where you don't really know anybody yet. So I think that that is important. Allie, you want to say your prices?
Yeah, so I mean, right now I budget for around 18 to 1900 for my apartment. That includes my cat, my trusty seat, my car, utilities, cable and Wi-Fi. It's kind of all packaged in. The further out you go, whether it's in the Maryland direction or the Virginia direction, it will get cheaper. I mean, there are some exceptions to that based off the county or city, but for the most part, the further away you are from the city, the cheaper it is. So like I said, this apartment I budget for around 18 to 1900 a month. My last apartment, I shared it with 3 other people. It was a pretty good size. It was an older apartment, and I was paying around 800 a month, which is really cheap for the area. But if you can find a good set of roommates and a good size apartment, it's possible. But I would definitely agree with the roommate situation. Like, you don't want to come to a new city and not have that support system at home. I would definitely recommend having a roommate. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, but definitely consider when looking for an apartment and budgeting and spending utilities. When you're looking for apartments, the amenity fees differ a lot. Also, if you have any pets, I didn't know that you have to pay $500 for a pet. You do. That's the thing, and it's non-refundable.
Is that a one-time payment, or is that like multiple?
No, it's one non-refundable payment to like kick off the fun, and then it's around $25 to $50. Could even go up to $75 per month based off of where you are. I pay $50 a month for my cat George, and then parking I pay around $75 a month. The city is really, really expensive. Some places don't even offer parking. So if you have a car or you want a car, that's something to really think about. I just purchased my car like last month, and I had just been relying off public transit before that, which is totally fine. It's definitely doable.
Yeah. So we'll definitely touch upon more about the transportation once we get to that section later on. But I know, Ali, you mentioned, and Sarah a little bit as well, the neighborhoods to consider a little bit in the DC area and where you're moving. So Sarah, I'll have you start off. What neighborhoods do you recommend to look for when you're looking for an apartment?
So again, I live in a neighborhood called NOMA, which stands for North of Massachusetts Avenue. It's up and coming, as are a lot of neighborhoods in the area, but it seems to be a popular location. I think it's fine. I'd give it a B, maybe. But like if I had a dream apartment, I really like the U Street area. Capitol Hill is beautiful, but it's a little bit more expensive. Shaw is getting really good. Navy Yard is like everything is clean and brand new, and it's near the water, and it's near a lot of fun things like Nationals Park, and they just built a soccer stadium. I'm gonna just quickly not recommend Georgetown because it's not close to anything, like no public transit. It's very, very touristy. It's fine to go there on a weekday, but like if you're around on a weekend, it's just a madhouse. So I don't recommend looking there, and it's very expensive anyway. Those are my personal favorites.
Awesome. And Ali?
I mean, Sarah hit a lot of it. Georgetown is, it's so hard to get in and out. So I agree with that. Just avoid that at all costs. I love Navy Yard. It's so expensive, but I love it. Nat Stadium is like my favorite place. They have the best hot dogs. Again, I'm also a huge advocate for living right outside the city. So the Pentagon City, Crystal City area, even Alexandria, which is where I am now. Yeah, I would say probably good rule of thumb, anywhere near a university or a school, but I would definitely recommend doing a walkthrough first, not of just the apartment, but of the general area.
Got it. And awesome. So we'll go on to our next question, which is when looking for an apartment, there's a lot of resources to use. So Sarah, what websites or resources would you recommend to find affordable housing?
When I first got my Baltimore apartment, so it was through a connection at UMass, but when we were finding roommates, we used Craigslist, which sounds really sketchy. But everyone we met was lovely and wonderful and normal. And then I think just based on location, because I knew kind of where I wanted to live, I kind of looked on a map and I just saw like apartments that popped up around where I wanted to live, and then looked like directly at that website because they have all the like tours and the plans and everything on that apartment website specifically. So that's how I did it.
Cool. Yeah. Ali, so I'll have you take it off. I know you mentioned a little bit about Zillow and some other Google sites. Would you mind elaborating on that a little bit?
Yeah, so actually, as Sarah was talking, I had a little bright idea. So when I first found out or decided that I was moving to DC, I joined all of the alumni groups. So I was an Alpha Chi, so I joined the Alpha Chi alumni group, the UMass alumni group. I was accepted to Georgetown at the time, so I joined like the Georgetown student sublet, rent out, whatever it's called, page. And I pretty much just went on and I posted, I said a little bit about myself, like literally when you're first starting off in college and you say that whole little blurb about who you are, what you do, what you're looking for, pretty much one of those. And I actually had a lot of people comment on that and help me that way too.
Great. So I think we'll move on to our spending category. I know a big thing about spending is budgeting appropriately, especially in DC. So Ali, what does your budget look like, and are there any fees you didn't expect initially?
Yeah, so kind of like what I mentioned before, I budget around 18 to 1900 for my apartment. That's pretty all inclusive for everything, and then my car. I kind of just like lump it all under one. I would probably say, obviously, I know when people move here, they don't. It's not like it's raining money, so obviously you want to be balling on a budget. But I would probably say if you come here with a, it's tough because it depends where you are. So like if you were in my area, like in Virginia, I would probably say if you came with a budget of maybe 2,000 a month, you would be okay. It's definitely different for the city. I'm not as familiar with the city. But I would say for the fees, like I said before, the CAT was a big thing, the deposit, and then the utility thing with the meters. That was a really big surprise for me.
Yep. And Sarah?
So I think the general rule of thumb for rent, I think it was supposed to be like a quarter or a third of your salary, I believe, per month. So just to kind of plan that out, if you do know what you're going to be making hourly, and also take the taxes out of your checks because that's thousands of dollars a year. But I think I split my rent. I pay 1/3. My husband pays 2/3, just because of the way that our salaries break down. And then we share a car together as well, parking. We kind of split up our other bills separately, which again, would be good to have a roommate for that reason. But I think, yeah, if you're in the city, I think it would be nice to probably make over 60 to be comfortable, 70, something like that.
Yeah, wow, yeah. So it's definitely a lot for students to really consider when going to DC, and they definitely have to budget appropriately with whatever job they get and their plans. So we'll go on to the next question. So what is a cost that you did not budget for properly that you would advise others to do before they make the commitment to move. So Allie, I'll have you start off on that one.
I'm trying to think because we kind of touched upon this a bit.
Yeah, I know you mentioned the cat, so that's
I
one.
would also say I would probably say the car was the biggest thing. I mean,
Yeah.
when I moved here, I didn't have a car, but I did have a lot of friends that did.
Yep.
That was a really big shock because in Massachusetts we have ample space. I mean, maybe not so much in Boston or in the cities, but at UMass there's plenty of parking, and you don't really have to think about that. But parking can get really steep, really pricey, really quickly. And then I would also kind of remind people, like the friendly reminder for student loans. People forget about those. I know I did, and I have to start paying them, I think, in August. So that's a big thing, especially if you are like, depending on the payment plan you pick,
Yep.
it could be upwards of $1,200 a month for student loans. So I would just remind people about that.
Yeah, so I definitely think the student loans are an important factor, and not forget that. And you mentioned something about parking, Allie. So how much does usually parking cost? Do you happen to know the parking fees associated with having a car?
Yeah, so for me in my building it's 75. My old building was 125. I've had friends in the city where they had to pay upwards of 200, 250 for parking. I've had other friends that their building they didn't have it at all. I'm sure Sarah could speak more to that though.
Yeah, you can take it away, Sarah.
In my current building, I pay 175 for our car, which is part of the reason that we only have one car. It would be silly to pay all that money for two. And if you can, I mean, if you live it somewhere in like a neighborhood that has street parking, I believe it's probably like $40 a year for like the actual street parking permit. But one of my like unfortunate surprise costs when I started traveling to DC a lot was parking tickets and how costly they are, like hundreds of dollars accidentally racked up. So watch out. If I could touch on student loans for just a minute, I started out with a graduated repayment plan. Like I know a lot of my friends started out doing like the full $1,200 a month, which basically could be like a rent payment. At the time, before I moved down to Baltimore, I like was not making nearly enough money to pay that. So I ended up starting out paying like just a tiny bit. It was like under $200 a month, which would increase gradually. I would say like it was nice for me at the time. Looking back on it, almost 8 years later, I kind of regret it because I'm still paying my student loans. I think it's a nice thing to start out that way, but then like once you're financially a little bit more comfortable, jack up your payment a lot more. Like,
Yeah,
I wish I had done that.
And
I
I'd also
agree.
add,
Yeah.
if you're a government employee or some sort of like government official or whatever it is, or a teacher, you can look into the programs. But the federal reimbursement program is a huge thing. I'm just starting out that process now. And if you don't know much about it, I'm not going to get into it right now because that's just a whole nother beast in its own, but I would definitely recommend looking into it and seeing if you qualify for it, because that can really cut that down.
And Allie, is there a website for that?
I would start on FAFSA or like the studentaid.gov. If you just Google the federal student loan reimbursement program,
Yep.
it should pop right up.
Great, got it. Awesome. So we'll move on to transportation. So of course, I noted that you both have cars now. So what do you think the benefits are other than pricing versus, and I know we also talked about getting in and out of the city. What are the benefits of having a car versus using public transportation? Do you see one relying more on another? Have you found yourself using rideshare services like Uber and Lyft? So Ali, I'll have you start.
So before my car, I used Uber a lot. I also lived with someone, lived with someone that I worked with. So we were able to kind of split that in half. Metro is so easy to use. If you live near a station, I would 1000% recommend it. The only tough part is you just have to make sure that you're budgeting for that time in your morning commute because it takes a little longer, obviously, than if you were to drive yourself. I love having my car. Since I drive like 20, 25 minutes to work every day, I think it's great. It cuts my commute like by so much. If I took the metro, it would probably take me a good hour and a half to get to work, just because I have to jump lines and switch and stuff. But I mean, Uber's everywhere. It's really not hard getting a taxi or an Uber. there's literally, or bikes. They have bikes and like the scooters are now a thing. You really aren't stuck anywhere ever.
Awesome. Yeah. And Sarah?
Honestly, the only reason that we have a car is to conveniently get back to Massachusetts. Well, not the only reason, but that's probably the biggest one. I personally don't drive to work because I can't park on campus in a hospital, only nights and weekends. So I get to work via either a shuttle, which is down the street, or Uber. So my husband will drive to work. He drives from inside DC to Northern Virginia, which he uses a lot. But if you're going to live in the city and then work in the city along somewhere close to a metro route, it's like not quite worth having your car. But I guess if you're planning on going home a lot, that could be a reason.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, so definitely there's a lot of trade-offs with having a car versus using public transportation. So I think that's really important for graduates to consider, especially with the cost of having a car. Even that alone can deter a lot of people from owning one. So we'll move on to the social scene. A lot of graduates, when they're first moving to a new city, they might either know someone who's living there, they might be coming in completely by themselves. So Sarah, I'll have you start off for this one. So what's the social scene look like? What are some ways of creating a new social scene for yourself?
I am kind of unique in that I have a lot of random weekdays off. So that's when I might get like my errands and stuff done. Happy hour in DC is a pretty big deal. It's not really a thing in Massachusetts because of the law, which is silly. But I feel like everywhere, every corner has a bar that has happy hour specials. I hang out with a lot of my nursing coworkers just because we happen to be off also midweek random days. But I would say things to help kind of like get your foot in the door. I joined a ClassPass to kind of like see a bunch of different workout studios all over the city without committing to one. And that's really nice because it kind of forces you to like travel to maybe a different neighborhood that you haven't been to. There are a lot of social sports groups, not that I'm in one, but there are signs for them everywhere. Outdoor movies during the summer, like there happens to be one right outside my apartment building, which is really nice. But like every neighborhood I feel like has some place that you can go and watch a movie once a week. And then this is like, it's hard to live in DC and not be in some facet political. I didn't really care about politics at all before I lived here, but I feel like if you're for some kind of like a cause, or if you have a side, there will be somewhere for you to get involved in that. I don't know.
Got it. Yep. And Allie?
So kind of going off of happy hour, brunch is a huge thing here. Definitely a good way to use up your Saturday or Sunday. We have some good breweries in the area. Hiking, you can go to Great Falls in Maryland or the Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. I mentioned the sporting events before. I'll always be a Boston fan at heart, but the Nats and the Caps are really awesome. The games are both pretty cheap too, and it's easy to get there, both right off of a metro stop. I'm trying to think. My shameless plug for the Alumni Association, they have some pretty awesome gatherings quite frequently, and you meet a lot of cool people that way. I honestly meet UMass people all over the city all the time, and I'm like, oh my God, you went to UMass too? That's so cool. Trying to think. Jazz in the park, that's a really cool thing that you could do on a Friday after work when it gets nice out. Literally, it's what it is. Like there's a jazz band playing at the Sculpture Garden, and you can get sangria or beer, and you can kind of just sit with your friends on a blanket and talk, and it's really awesome. But yeah, I would definitely recommend joining some groups, maybe some intramural leagues. Just reaching out to some people maybe even posting about it before you move here. So if there's like a friend of a friend of a friend, you can hook up that way, but there's always stuff to do.
Great. Yeah. So, Sarah, what are some good places to eat at? I know one was mentioned, and I've seen it on the news before, the Navy Shipyard. That's the place it's called, right? Is it the Navy Shipyard? Is that what it's called?
Navy Yard is a neighborhood.
Yeah, it's a neighbor. I heard there's some good place to eat there. But I don't. Do you have any recommendations of your favorite spots?
Um, so it's tough. Like every neighborhood has great things except for Noma. There's no food here, unfortunately. But my favorite places to eat are around like 14th and U Street. There's just the whole street. 14th has a ton of really good restaurants. Like a famous one that a lot of people like is La Diplomat. I really like Farmers and Distillers. I don't know if people are like writing these down, but I don't know. Every neighborhood has really good food. A lot of good Italian in Georgetown. Georgetown has wonderful restaurants. You should go there for that. But it's hard to pinpoint. I guess it's just based on where you live.
Awesome. And Allie?
Yeah, Sarah kind of hit it. I would probably name it Ted's Bulletin. They have a lot of good stuff. That's pretty popular. But yeah, it definitely depends on where you are. You can literally, there's places everywhere.
Awesome. Okay. So we'll move on to the next question. So, Sarah, what's your favorite thing to do in the city? Whether it's go to a monument, a famous monument, or a park, or somewhere to eat. What's your favorite thing to do?
Well, it is just based on my location. It's really nice. Like if I'm taking my dog on a walk, I can walk up the street 15 minutes and I'm at the Capitol building, which is like one end of the National Mall if you haven't been. So it's the other day we took a walk and there was a protest, like a student walked out for gun safety, which I didn't know was happening. But then I was like, hey, might as well stay here for a few minutes and listen. So it's just kind of nice that you are literally right in the thick of it. You can walk, your neighborhood is the place where all these tour groups are checking out, and it's just historic right in your backyard.
Awesome. And Allie?
Um, well, I didn't have a lot of free time before this, and now all of a sudden I have all this free time, so I'm trying to fill it. But my favorite place isn't in the city. It's called Gravelly Point Park, and it's right by the airport. And so you can kind of go and hang out. There's like a huge chunk of land that people go and play rugby, football, whatever. They just throw frisbees or just hang out on a blanket. And you can literally, the airplanes, either they land or take off like 500 feet, like right above you. It's awesome. So if you're ever in the area and you want to check that out, I would recommend it. That's kind of my happy place. Or to be super cliche, the monuments at night. That's everyone's favorite. But I mean, after you're out on a Saturday night and you're not ready to go home quite yet, that's a good place to end the fun.
Awesome. Yeah. So a lot of good social activities for people to partake in when they go to DC. So I definitely recommend trying all those out. So we'll go on to the last category of the night, which is advice. So Allie, I'll have you start off with this. So what advice would you share with a recent graduate moving to the DC area?
I know it's scary uprooting your whole life and kind of moving to a place that's really unfamiliar to you, but it was the best thing I've ever done for myself. I grew a lot as a person. I learned that going out to dinner by yourself isn't scary. It's actually quite peaceful. Obviously, I wouldn't do it every night, but I feel like I grew a lot as a person, and it takes a lot to kind of to actually take the push to move. But I would recommend it. And just like be social, like throw yourself out there. The cool thing about DC is there's always people coming and going. So there's always going to be people in your shoes. People are always going to be new or getting ready to leave or whatever. So you kind of just show up and you introduce yourself. 9 out of 10 times people will just go with it. Like they're very friendly. But yeah, I would just say take the jump. It's worth it.
Yeah. And Sarah?
So I only knew one person when I moved down here. So that was like a little bit frightening for me, but then I made a ton of friends. So it's definitely easy. You don't need to know a bunch of people in order to move down here and have a good time. But I do recommend if you aren't moving here knowing anybody, try to like be friendly with your neighbors in case you need something in a pinch, whether it's like sugar or somebody to walk your dog or something like that. I would say learn how to grocery shop and cook so you're not spending all your money out at the bars and the restaurants, which is like super easy to do. because cocktails here are very expensive. So it's not McMurphy's. Sorry about that. I don't know. Just, yeah, spend responsibly until you figure out how much you actually can afford.
Yeah, definitely it's important to take the first step to move to the DC area and to definitely budget, two very important things. So we'll go to our last question. So Allie, how did moving to the city benefit your life?
So I was pretty independent before, but let me tell you, living by yourself in a new city definitely takes it to a whole new level. Definitely forced me to come out of my own, out of my shell. I'm a pretty social person. Anyone that knows me will agree with that. But it's scary when you're meeting new people. And honestly, even if you don't want to talk to people, just walk around and explore. It's nice to see the new area. But like I said, like it just really, I truly feel as though like I grew as a person since being here. Sometimes I'll stop and think and be like, oh my God, how did I get here? And why am I doing the things that I'm doing at my age? But I don't know. I just, it really helped me a lot.
Got it.
Helped me grow. That's all I can really say. That's all I don't have anything else. I'm sorry.
And Sarah?
Yeah, I came here planning on being away from Massachusetts for 2 years, and now I'm going on 8. So I feel like that happens to everybody. It's just a wonderful place to live. It's a big melting pot. You meet so many people you never would have met. I mean, Massachusetts, especially Amherst, is pretty sheltered. You're in a bubble. Like, you really don't know much about life while you're in school, which I didn't, but now I feel like I kind of do. So it forces you to just broaden your horizons. It's like really a good mix down here.
Yeah, I definitely agree. If you're taking a first step, you learn a lot about yourself and a lot about the world that you live in. So I think that's two very important things for graduates to discover and that they will discover moving to a new city. Do either of you have any final thoughts on anything? Anything to add?
It's
Great.
great.
Awesome. So we'll go into, we got one question from a viewer. So they're asking, answer either of you, so feel free to answer. So how far in advance should I start the apartment search process?
I mean, you could honestly move to the city and find an apartment the next day. They're pretty readily available, but I would say I would probably plan like a month or two just so you can kind of get a handle on what you're looking for and where you want to be. Because I mean, I know I toured a couple apartments before I settled on my first one, just because you kind of, once you start looking, you get a feel for what you like or dislike. I lived in an apartment my senior year at UMass, so I kind of had a good idea on what I wanted and didn't want. If you didn't live off campus, or even if you did, you might not know. So I would just make sure you give yourself that wiggle room. I'd probably say like 1 to 2 months.
Awesome. Yeah. Sarah, anything to add to that?
In my particular area in Noma, there are always new buildings being built, which is nice because that means there's always a ton of vacant units. I can think of like 4 or 5 that went up in the last year. So it's nice because you probably could find in like certain areas, you could find apartments really quickly just based off of that. But that's not everywhere in DC. So I would agree with 1 to 2 months.
Awesome. So that concludes our event. And a little plug to our social media. If you haven't done so already, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to hear the latest news about future SAA events. We thank you again for your participation in tonight's event and look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you to both our panelists for devoting their time to this event, and we hope to see you at future UMass alumni events. All right. Have a good night, everyone, and thank you so much.
Thank you.